Let's talk about some books that I probably won't read in the next 10 years. But I want to read them one day before I die. So this is going to be my reading bucket list. I saw this video on my friend Leonie's channel, the Book Leo, and I thought it was a very fun idea to just talk about the books that you would just want to read one day before you die. These are just books that I'm so interested in, I really want to read one day. So without further ado, let's take a look. Spoiler alert, there are lots of classics on this list and big books. Basically all the books that intimidate me. I have a big pile of books. I'm just gonna grab the first one, which is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. Yes, I have never read this book. I never had to read it for school. It is very rad because Michelle's father, Michelle's a good friend of mine, she has a YouTube channel as well called Books Michelle, and her father once borrowed this book to read it on holiday, and that is years ago, and I mean like 6, 7 years ago maybe? So that's how long this book has been on my shelf, unread by me. This is of course a very famous book. Many people have read it for school. I haven't. I just have to read it one day. I'm not gonna say that with every book I have to read it one day. The next one is We the Drowned by Carsten Jensen. This one again has been on my TBR for years. This is apparently a very like a sea tale kind of adventure story that takes place on sea on a ship, very pirate inspired, and it says that the novel tells of ships wrecked and blown up in wars, of places of terror and violence that continue to lure each generation. There are cannibals there, shrunken heads, prophetic dreams and miraculous survivals, and the result is a brilliant seafaring novel, a gripping saga encompassing industrial growth, the years of expansion and exploration, the crucible of the first half of the 20th century, and most of all, the sea. Well, if you've been following my channel for a while, you may know that I just generally really like pirate-ish stories that takes place on sea. Even though the sea is my biggest fear, I think the sea is scary as heck, but if I'm not on the sea, it's fine. So stories and films about things on the sea really interest me. So this one definitely sounds right up my alley. I just haven't read it yet. Then next up, we have the entire Diviners series. I started this one years ago. I've read the first one, but I still haven't picked up the rest of this book series. However, I'm super intrigued by it. So the Diviners is a really cool like fantasy series that takes place in the 1920s in New York. I believe it's New York, right? Yeah. It's about a girl named Evie and she has a supernatural power. Monsters, supernatural powers, New York, 20s. Really freaking cool. The first one I thought was absolutely brilliant. I just haven't picked up the rest of this series, but one day I will. Then we have the Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. This is actually the second copy of the Da Vinci Code I had because I bought my first copy in 2015. It was a secondhand copy and I thought, yes, I'm gonna read the Da Vinci Code. It's such a famous book. Never read it, and then I thought, I don't think I want to read it, so I unhauled it. And then I thought, no, I actually do want to read it. And then I found this one in one of these little libraries that are across town. So I picked it up again, and now I will read it one day. I generally don't really know what this is about. Isn't it about this like a museum and Leonardo da Vinci and mystery? That's it. Let me know in the comments if you have read the Da Vinci Code. And also, isn't this like the second book in the series, but you can still read it? Something like that. Can you tell I don't really know much about this book? But it is definitely a very famous one that I'm going to read one day. Okay, let's talk about some classics. The first one is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. I just really want to read a big Charles Dickens book. I have read A Christmas Carol, but that one is short and not too difficult. However, this one is probably going to be quite dense, but it is like one of his most famous works, and I'm just interested to see if I can appreciate this and if I, you know, like it. I have zero clue what this book is about. But we will see once I read this book. Again, let me know in the comments if you have read any Charles Dickens. Maybe you had to read it for school. I never have read any, I read like one famous book for school. It was Brave New World and I hated it. I was like 15. Couldn't they have picked any other book than Brave New World? I really didn't like it, and also just because I had to read it. I don't like the fact that they choose these difficult classics to read in school, especially when you're 15 and you're like 15, 14, 15, something like that, and you just don't feel like reading these type of books. By the way, a little appreciation for my bookshelf. Look at the cool lights that I put around it, and I can use a clicker to turn them on and off, which is amazing. And I have a little candle there, and I have my little nutcracker because Christmas is coming. Okay, next one. Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. I started this one in 2016 and I am on page 425. Why didn't I just do it and why didn't I continue? Because when I'm, you know, actually want to read this, I just want to start over because, you know, like I know the story, but I still just want to read the entire book and not continue with a book that I started 5 years ago. Oh my goodness, I just realized 2016, how long ago that is. So yeah, Les Mis. Can you tell I'm intimidated by this book? This is my biggest, like the biggest book I have on my shelf. It is over 1200 pages and it is dense and the font is small, but it is just like one of my favorite, it is my favorite musical. I just want to know the original story. I'm gonna do it one day. One day. Another book series that I really want to complete one day is A Song of Ice and Fire by George R. R. Martin. This is an amazing illustrated edition, which is absolutely gorgeous. It's full of illustrations and they're all from different illustrators. All of the art style is very different. Well, let me see if I can find my favorite one. It's a beautiful one by like from the Naras and Khal Drogo. Ooh, this one is really cool as well. Look how different every piece of art is. That's so brilliant. But I have read 3.5 books in A Song of Ice and Fire, and I sure do hope that he will live to finish this entire series, because I want to know how it ended and like how he wanted to convey the ending, not the TV show ending. Probably going to be the same ending, but it doesn't feel too right for me. I'm pretty sure that he has envisioned it kind of happening differently. You know what I'm talking about if you've seen the TV show. I actually reread the first one and annotated it, and then I started the second one as well, annotating it. So maybe I can just, you know, of course, like I'm going to continue with that, but I just need to be in the right mood to read his books because I want to annotate it, and I think it's brilliant just seeing all these foreshadowing things. But it just takes me a long time to read it because they're quite big and dense, and some chapters are just really boring. At the end of every chapter, when I annotated them, I put a little post-it note and I just summarize the chapter. So, you know, if I want to go back to it, I just know exactly what happens in which chapter. And sometimes I just have a chapter where I literally write down, nothing happened. Just talking, nothing interesting. So it just takes a long time to read these books because they're big and dense. But yes, one day I am going to finish this series. The next one is The Odyssey by Homer. This is definitely one that I want to read one day. I didn't really realize when I bought this book that there are so many different translations of the Odyssey, like by different people. So I didn't really look up people's favorite translations and like accurate translations. I just picked this one up because I really like the cover, but I'd have to look up some reviews to see if this translation by this translator is easy to read for someone whose native language isn't English, who isn't very well known with all of these old texts and stuff. Otherwise, I will just like read this one or a different one. It says, because like the Odyssey is literature's grandest evocation of every man's journey through life, at once an ageless human story and an individual test of moral endurance. It's probably going to be quite a read. I'm just very interested to see if I can do it. Let's talk about another classic, Middlemarch by George Eliot. I just love this. Look, it looks amazing. It is pretty big though, and I have to say, don't really know what this book is about. The reason I actually bought this was because of sex education and Meg Wiley reading it, or like her mum reading it. I was like, I need to read this book now. I freaking love Meg Wiley. I love her book recommendations. So I'm gonna pick this one up. I picked up this cover because it's just so gorgeous. I love these editions by Penguin so much. One day I'm gonna read this, but she big, but she very floppy. I love books like this that just stay open. Yes. Another classic is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. I've seen the film. I have only seen like the latest film, not the earlier one with Winona Ryder. I really want to see that as well. Absolutely loved it. I just want to read the original works one day, the original stories, just see like comparisons, similarities, differences. Gonna read this one day. I have lots of classics on my shelf that I haven't read. Although I think like one of these shelves is entirely full of classics, and I think I read half of them, which I'm still pretty proud of, but it's mostly the shorter ones. which is still okay. But yeah, one day I'm going to read all of these big ones. The next one is The Shadow of the Wind. This is again one of these famous books that many people have read in the world, however I haven't yet. I believe this is about like a graveyard, and it says that Daniel, he finds a mysterious book called The Shadow of the Wind, and he wants to find out more about this author and see if he wrote anything more. However, he makes a shocking discovery. Someone has been systematically destroying every copy of every book that Carrax, the writer, has written. In fact, Daniel may have the last of his books in history. Soon, Daniel's seemingly innocent quest opens the door into one of Barcelona's darkest secrets, an epic story of murder, madness, and doomed love. This sounds absolutely brilliant. Again, this is the same story as with the Da Vinci Code. I actually got myself a copy like in Dutch a couple of years ago in a thrift store, unhauled it a few years later because I hadn't read it yet, and then I saw this again in a little library thinking, this is meant to be, I have to read it now, because, you know, I found it in one of these libraries. Sometimes I feel like seeing a book like that somewhere is just a sign. I had the perfect story for that, because I think I got the Lord of the Rings books 10 years ago, something like that, and I started reading the first one. I couldn't get into it because it was just so like dense and a bit boring at the beginning. I thought, I don't know if this is gonna work, so I put it down again. Then a few years later, I went on a cool backpacking trip to New Zealand, and I went to a hostel there, saw The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, the first one, in one of these libraries, in a hostel where you can just pick a book and take it to the next hostel and just leave it there. And I saw it there, and I'm like, this is meant to be. It is The Lord of the Rings in New Zealand, aka Middle Earth, where they filmed everything. This is meant to be. I'm gonna pick it up. And I read it within like 3 or 4 days. Couldn't stop reading. It was amazing. And from that moment on, I was just like, yes, yes, I'm gonna read everything. And I read all of the Lord of the Rings books. So sometimes I just feel like it's a sign if I see a book somewhere that I've been meaning to read for a long time. And it was brilliant. And what I did then is I finished it on the airport on my way back home, but I didn't want to take it with me because it was just quite a big one, and you know, I didn't need it anymore. So I wrote in a little message like, I really hope you enjoy this book, and then I put it somewhere on a table in the airport. So I hope someone else found it and loved it as much as I did. It's like a sign from the universe to read a specific book. Okay, off topic. The last book I really want to read one day before I die is called Humankind by Rutger Bregman, or the original Dutch title is called De meeste mensen deugen. And I actually have the English one, but I do prefer to read it in Dutch one day because he's like a Dutch author. And it's basically about how he is trying to explain that humans are generally good, which I also, you know, want to believe, and which I do believe. But sometimes it's nice to just read a bit of research here and there, or just someone else's thoughts about this idea. This is just a very famous book as well. Don't really know how old this book is. When he first wrote this, let me see. 2019, so it's still rather new, but it's becoming a very famous one. It says, it is a belief that unites the left and right, psychologists and philosophers, writers and historians. It drives the headlines that surround us and the laws that touch our lives. From Machiavelli to Hobbes, Freud to Dawkins, the roots of this belief have sunk deep into Western thoughts. Human beings, we're taught, are by nature selfish and governed by self-interest. However, humankind makes a new argument that it is realistic as well as revolutionary to assume that people are good. And I do really want to believe that. I do believe it, but just, you know, as I said, it's just good to sometimes read a bit more about it. So this is the last book that I really want to read before I die. Let me know in the comments some of the books that are on your reading bucket lists, and I'm very curious to see if there are some similar books on there. Thank you, Leonie, for giving me this idea to film this video. It was really fun to just go through my bookshelf. There are probably going to be more books the older I get. However, for now, these really are the books that I want to read. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you want to comment something but you don't know what to comment a little stack of books, because there are lots of books next to me on my dining table and it's very fitting for this video. Again, thanks so much for watching. I hope you're having a beautiful day, and I will hopefully see you in my next video. Bye!